podcast, where we connect students, parents, and educators with meaningful conversations about education, college planning, growth, and the unique community here at the Village School of Naples. I'm your host, Andres Gonzalez, Director of Marketing and Communications. Each episode, we bring in special guests to share insights, stories, and expertise on topics that matter most to our listeners. Whether you're a current family or considering joining our village, this podcast is your front row seat to what makes TVS truly special. Now, let's dive in. Today, we're diving into a topic that's top of mind for every college-bound student, the SAT and ACT. Get ready as we uncover insider college secrets about how they utilize these scores to determine not only acceptance, but long-term success for each student. With more colleges reinstating test score requirements, what does this mean for students? How do SAT and ACT scores factor in a test-optional school versus places like UF, which never dropped the requirement? And beyond admissions, how do these scores impact scholarships and college readiness? We've got the perfect guest to break it all down, our returning expert, Mrs. Sue Zumstein, Director of College Counseling at the Village School of Naples and founder of Quest College Success. Get ready for an insightful conversation that could change the way you approach standardized testing and college prep. Let's jump in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. Welcome, Sue, back. Thank you again for coming for another wonderful episode filled with college information. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Very good. Thank you.
Good.
So let's go right from the top here. You wanted us to really focus on SAT and ACT scores. What's so important about SAT and ACT scores?
Well, I think it's interesting because everyone always considered them important until COVID hit. And then suddenly, of course, some students didn't have access to be able to take the tests. And so some colleges went test optional. They said, all right, we're going to focus on a transcript instead. And so over the past 4 to 5 years of COVID, how SATs and ACTs have factored into the college admissions process has changed a lot. And I will say for me professionally, and doing this for almost 30 years, this became one of the most challenging aspects in giving a student advice whenever they were applying to college, because Quest never went test optional. Ironically, when COVID hit, our students were all getting ready to take their SAT the Saturday morning as to when the weekend before Collier County schools were shutting down. And I was literally texting with Dr. Kamala Patton, who was still head of Collier County schools at the time. She and I were texting that Friday night before the test saying, this high school is still going to offer it tomorrow, but then we're shutting down on Monday. This high school is going to offer it, but we're still shutting down then on Monday. Most of my Quest kids were able to get in that year and get a test under their belt, thank goodness. And we have been preparing them for that all along. So we have never taken the approach that the scores aren't relevant, because they are. My advice to families is always, don't look as to whether a college is test optional. The first question I always ask colleges whenever they start talking about SATs or ACTs is, here's the question. Last year, the students you accepted, how many did you accept with a test score versus without a test score? I don't care that they're test optional. I need to know specifically, and this is the real number, most colleges, 40 to 60% of the students they accept for their incoming class is with test scores. It's with test scores. So when we start our juniors going through the test prep process, we are asking every student 100% to be locked in that I am going to be ready to be a student who applies to my college. I'm going to apply to my colleges with scores. Mm-hmm. Now, our state universities never went test optional in Florida. Ever, ever, ever. Everyone still had to submit SATs or ACTs. For our students, that wasn't an issue because we considered tests to always be relevant. We wanted every one of our students to be prepared to submit tests, and we still are, because schools like MIT, next year, University of Miami, they're going back to requiring test scores. And if we know that 40 to 60% of the college students that are accepted in a freshman class at a college that is test optional, if 40 to 60% were accepted with scores, that's what we need to know. That's what kids and families need to focus on.
It almost makes more sense to just keep it as if nothing had ever changed, and tests are always going to be required, I guess.
Well, and we need to, where the challenge became really, really relevant was, say, like a school at a Villanova or a Notre Dame, let's say. So when those colleges are telling me we're taking 50 to 60% of our freshman class with scores, and by the way, here are the mid-range areas of the scores of the people that we accepted. So let's say the mid-range area was a 1450 to a 1510, let's just say, because those are pretty competitive schools. Well, all of a sudden, I have a student who has a 1400 on an SAT, not a 1450. Well, they're out of that mid-range, but they're not horribly out of the mid-range. A 1400 isn't a bad score, but it's not a 1450. Suddenly, professionally, for all of us, when scores were required, okay, that was the score you were applying with. Now, all of a sudden, there's this gray area.
Of included or not.
Exactly. And do I submit that score or not? So then what we had to do professionally as a staff was say to the student, okay, if you're applying without an SAT or ACT, does your transcript support you applying without a score? Let's take a look at the rigor of your curriculum. Let's go back and take a look at the grades that you've earned. Let's take a look at the rigor of your senior year coursework. And will your transcript bear up under being the only measurable academic benchmark that a college is using to evaluate you at this point? And so, like I said, for me professionally, all of a sudden there was this huge gray area with so many students of, well, I'm not quite at their middle 50%, what do I do? And I will just say, I tell colleges this all the time. I almost just wish you'd go back to requiring test scores, because navigating this gray area within a more holistic approach becomes deeply challenging for those of us that are working in college advising right now.
The big aha moment for me that you're inspiring here is, just because you took the SAT or the ACT doesn't mean you have to submit the SAT or ACT.
Correct, you don't.
But then it's a very strategic, analytical process to make that determination. It's not a straight black and white, like you're saying, gray area.
100%, because suddenly students and families are looking at my yes or no in submitting scores as being the be all end all for recommendations. But then again, if I know that 50 to 60% of the students being accepted are with scores, and it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. And the recommendation for every student becomes different depending on that transcript, and then the essay, and then their activities. There are so many other things that are now being factored in besides the test scores.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I think we just covered a little bit of what we had on our agenda here in terms of how does the SAT and ACT factor in at these different schools. Tell me a little bit about college readiness benchmarks.
So this is a little dirty unknown secret within our Florida State University system. Students and parents seem to think that there's one set of criteria for test scores and getting into, say, FGCU or Florida Atlantic versus the University of Florida or Florida State. And there are different criteria, don't get me wrong. But what is steady throughout all of that is that in the state of Florida, there are college readiness benchmarks that are dictated. They're published by the Florida Department of Education, and their relevance is that a certain SAT or ACT score, let's say in math, The college readiness benchmark on an SAT in math is a 520, and that's out of an 800. Perfect score is a 520 in the math. That 520, through lots of studies, lots of student surveys through the colleges, says that you have a 75% chance of getting a B in a basic freshman math class, and a 50% chance, no, sorry, it's a 75% chance of getting a C, a 50% chance of getting a B. And through interviewing thousands of kids over the years, that's proven to be true.
Wow.
And so kids always focus on, and parents to an extent, what kind of score do I need to get into college? Well, I would like everybody to back up a little bit and stop to think about, what kind of score do I need to be demonstrating that I am going to be successful in the mandatory classes that I have to take at a state university in Florida? Because in Florida, 120 credits are required to graduate from one of our state universities. 30% or 40 of those credits are dictated as core academic requirements or general education requirements at our state university. That is college algebra 1 semester, college algebra 2 the second semester. That 520 on the SAT is the predictor as to how you're going to do in that mandatory course in order to graduate from a state university in Florida. So my point as to how this comes back to college admissions is, there are sub scores that need to be hit, not just a total SAT score. So, okay, you can maybe get into the University of South Florida with, say, a 1200 on an SAT. But if your math is exceptionally low and doesn't hit those college readiness benchmarks, then you could be having an issue in spite of the overall score. So that's why when we do SAT and ACT prep, we're not simply looking at an overall composite score. We want to make sure that students have hit the college readiness benchmarks in order to demonstrate that they can achieve once they're in college. And so, test scores aren't just about getting in. They're also benchmarks as to how ready are you for the mandatory work. Then we can segue into, wow, if you have a school that you're applying to test optional, how does that impact scholarship money? How does that impact not financial aid, but merit money? So we know that on a Bright Futures qualification, students need to hit a specific SAT and an ACT score in order to get either the Florida Academic Scholar or the Florida Medallion Scholar money awards to be able to attend college in Florida. Well, University of Alabama, for example, is test optional, and a student can apply their test optional, but their scholarship award will be less if they're applying without scores versus if they're applying with scores. I think everybody again got all excited about no test scores for admissions. Well, let's go back and stop and think now, if you're applying without scores, how does that impact your opportunities for scholarships? So to me, the long and the short of this podcast should be, every single junior that begins the process of getting ready to apply to college, we always start with testing. We look at preparing for SATs and ACTs as training for a marathon, not for a sprint.
Okay.
This is a 3-hour test, and every time you take it, it's a different test. And so in helping students in the preparation, there's a lot of material that we have to cover. And these tests are relevant for a multitude of reasons. Admissions, scholarship offers, and then how well are you going to do once you're there?
Yeah.
And these tests have valid reasons as to why they demonstrate all of that. we have noticed more and more schools going back to requiring test scores, and I think that's going to continue. I think in the next 3 to 4 years, we will see more schools going back and requiring SATs and ACTs in the future.
Well, no doubt. Your third point about it being the scores being a predictor to the future, it really makes you, like you said, step back and kind of look at the bigger picture here, not just look at how do I get in, what number do I need, but then it's going to be a predictor for my success once I'm there.
100%. You know, here at the Village School, we are getting ready. We'll be doing scheduling in March, and believe it or not, for all of our students that are currently at the Village School, so for the rising 10th graders, 11th and 12th, I've had their schedules done.
Wow.
Metaphorically in pencil, but on a big old giant spreadsheet. What we need, of course, are the teacher recommendations and looking at that. But we also went back and looked at PSAT scores and pre-ACT scores.
Oh, sure.
And then if a student is, and parents are absolutely saying they want their child to go to college, I have to think about what math curriculum do you need to have under your belt in high school in order to not only do well on an SAT or ACT, but I also look at it as what math curriculum do you need to be able to handle the math curriculum you may be required to take in college.
Sure.
Because if you attend a state university, again, they're going to dictate a third of those required credits for graduation. So I think so many times parents look at graduating from high school and the testing, and it's all about getting in. I am always pulling back and looking at, for testing, scheduling for courses. What do you need to have accomplished and have learned and have under your belt by the time you start college? Because in my mind, a student starting college and not being prepared for success is a failure. The measure of the success, to me, never comes from the student getting into college. The measure of success is whenever they graduate. That, to me, is the important part. I can get a student into almost any college. All right, that isn't the issue. We have so many options besides state universities.
Sure.
And students can end up at a state university even if they start at FSW. That isn't the point. The point is, are you going to graduate in 4 years with little to no debt so that you can go out into the world and find your way? That's the measure of success. And if we need to back up and think about, okay, getting ready for an SAT or ACT, and what courses and scheduling are going to allow us to help you find the success, that's what I care about.
I think that's a very wise perspective, and I'm so grateful that you're here to share that perspective with our families. Was there anything else you wanted to add for this episode?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think, the point is go into your test prep and don't take the philosophy of I'm a bad test taker. Let's make sure that we take your junior year and we work hard so that you can become a better standardized test taker.
Perfect.
That's the goal.
Okay. Well, on that goal, I think we'll end this episode.
All right.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your time.
Absolutely.
And to everybody listening, Sue has shared with me she's happy to come back with additional information. So stay tuned for future episodes with Sue here helping us for college planning. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.